Thank you so much for granting us this interview.
Thank you, man. I look forward to this. I'm, really appreciating you guys for taking the time to do that.
Sure. I like to start off by, because we, the Potter's House, are a fellowship of churches, and we have a lot of churches around the world. And when I get an opportunity like this one, I like to ask and just find out about a church in a given area. And I was wondering if you could tell us about your church and where you're pastoring, how long you've been there. And
Yeah, so I'm pastoring in the city called as Bangalore in India, which is in the south of India. And our church is now open for the last 25 years now. We are the leadership church there, and we have almost 56 churches now in the nation of India now. And, the churches in the down south, in the city of Bangalore, there's a location called as Coxtown, and that's where I'm pastoring right now.
okay, so the church in Bangalore, was it the first ever church in India?
Yes, the church in Bangalore that I am pastoring right now was the first church planted into the nation of India.
Wow. Was it from Chandler? Is it?
Yes, it was from Chandler under Pastor Campbell's leadership.
Oh, thanks. And, as a fellowship, we build our churches on conversions.
Yes.
Yeah. That means we go outside the four walls and preach the gospel, and hopefully that people can experience salvation. And I'd like for you to share with us your conversion experience, how you came to know Christ.
I come from a Christian background. My, parents, they were, we were nominal Christians, but we were from an established church, more like a Protestant church. But, going to church was just part of what we did as a Christian, but when I came into the door or the Potter's House, we are called the Door Church in Coxtown. I remember I had an experience in one of the churches, one apostolic churches, but then, the church broke, and, I just, had a just backsliding experience. And I remember coming into the door, being invited, and when I walked in and I heard that sermon and the challenge for my sin, then, that was what really got me, because most places there was no challenge on sin. It was always dealing with something of your life, but never sin and change of heart. That conversion experience or that transformation of life was not addressed. And that's one of the marks and the beauty of our fellowship, is that when I walked in, the preacher was preaching and he gave an altar call and he challenged, if your heart's not right, you're in sin, you need to give your life to Jesus. And that was in the month of June 2002. When I gave my life to Jesus, I bowed my knee down. I said, God, I'm backslidden, I'm running away from you, I want a change of heart. And that's when I gave my life to Jesus.
Wow. And after your conversion, just thinking, how long did it take you for you to just become fully committed to church, to the point where you didn't have to be nudged by the person who was working with you?
Well, obviously I come from a religious background, so I was thinking my wife at that time was my girlfriend. I said, listen, this is amazing. This place is good for our spiritual growth, the door. But Sunday mornings, let's go to an established church where we can get membership and get benefits. So after getting saved, maybe a week and a half or two, I went in the morning to a different church. And in the evenings and Wednesdays, I would come to the door. But all it took was 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, God was challenging me. There were things that God was pulling out of me. And in 2 weeks, I said, forget the established church. This is where we're going to go. And in 2 weeks, we started coming every service.
Wow.
Just committed right from, 2002.
And how long did it take you to get involved and start doing something in the church?
Well, we started off immediately. We didn't wait, because I was so excited because God was doing something in me. I knew that He touched me. And then also my wife, when she came in afterwards, maybe a service later, she came, she got saved, rededicated again her life. So we were super excited at the possibility that God could use us. And I don't think so we waited. We did everything possible to help in the church in cleanup and support pastor and outreaching and all of those things. And then we had no clue what ministry was, but we just wanted to help in the church.
And then the time that you felt called to preach, how long was it after you got saved?
Well, one of the critical thing I would tell even on this interview is that conference videos play a very big part. So I remember after getting saved, and then my pastor used to show Chandler conference videos, and I would be stirred to see people street preaching. I didn't know what street preaching was, or things like that, or conversion experiences, baptisms, outreaches, music scenes, dramas. We would watch all of that, and something was being stirred in me. This happened in 2002. So it took a year or almost 2 years when these things were marinating inside me, and it was in the year 2004 in our first conference in India where I heard the call to preach. Pastor gave a call. He said, if God is calling you young men to preach the gospel, I want you to come forward. And I'll never forget that, this thing that was stirring in my heart. I just lifted my hands and I walked down as a single man. I said, God, I want to preach the gospel.
Wow. And where was the first place that you pioneered?
So the first place I pioneered was in a small suburb in Bangalore called as HBR Layout. Incidentally, my wife and I, we were the first pioneers. So we were the first people pioneering, but it was a great experience.
Wow. Yeah, and what are some of the challenges that you faced as a pioneer pastor that you would encourage other pioneer pastors that maybe facing the similar challenges?
Yeah, you know how pioneering is, and especially if you are really committed and working in the church, one of the things you have to overcome is loneliness. Is you're all by yourself, But the beauty is that as you keep connected to your mother church, keep in connection with your mother church pastor, and the most important thing I would say is just do what you were trained to do in the mother church, and God does. The beauty is to see that God will start to build something from nothing. And that's amazing. So loneliness was a big struggle for us. And then the other thing was sometimes the frustration that you give out thousands of flyers and nobody comes in. And it's like, God, where's everybody? And you get frustrated, but you overcome those things and keep holding on to the faith that as we keep sowing, you never know which seed will fall where, and the next seed could give you 30, 60, 100 fold.
Yeah. And as while we're still talking about pioneering, one of the challenges is, as you share the gospel, you get people saved. The challenge is getting them retained. And so what would you say are some key practical steps to take to retain, nurture, and get converts locked in? I think this would also help for an established
obviously, the motive is very important. It's not just bringing people to church. It's bringing them to Christ. A lot of people come to church, but they never come to Christ. So the challenge is there. The focus has to be, I need to bring them to Jesus. And that happens through relationship and friendship. So, I would, encourage that, you build relationship with people, genuinely be a friend to them, and, open your life to them. We opened our home, my wife and I, we opened our home at all times for these converts to come into our home, showing them, say, come see my life. I open my life for you guys. And then being there for them in their most difficult times, and just being a friend, being a shoulder that you can lean on to, being an ear that you can just listen to what they're going, and just praying. And that really connects the hearts of people, because what really got Jesus a large ministry is because the Bible says when he saw the crowds, he was moved with compassion. And that's the key in retaining converts, is that we have a compassion and this concern and a care for these people. And the truth is, people will know if you're faking it. Or people will definitely know if you genuinely care. And when you genuinely care, you can retain them and bring them into the house of God.
Oh, wow. And, looking at the Harvesters Rally, we really had some wonderful time, great sermons. And just to piggyback on some of the sermons that you've done, entering our heritage, homesick, and just last night, oil wars. One of the main things that you highlighted in these three sermons is the need for purity and living right. And so would you just stress how crucial that is for a church to uphold that, a church and its people to uphold moral purity, and the dangers of just neglect?
Yeah, obviously, I think, coming from the central statement that Jesus said, be holy because I am holy. So we start off with that because the God we serve is a holy God. Point number one. Point number two is that we are living in such a filthy and a dirty generation. And if there is no difference between us and the world, then how will they know the gospel? So very important, purity and holiness, in our lives personally, and then also in a family, and then definitely collectively as a congregation, because God is looking for pure vessels, through whom he can, work with and things like that. So that's why the challenge most I press is because the demonic is pushing dirt and filth, and he wants you to think it's okay to be that way. But God says, no, I want you to be like me, because we are his bride, and we have to present ourselves, the Bible says, as a chaste virgin
Yes.
to God when he returns. I don't want to be prostituting myself with the world, and when then Jesus comes, present myself. No, I'm going to keep myself holy. My bridegroom is coming. I got to be pure. I got to be holy. So that's the driving factor, I would say.
Yeah. And as I believe a pastor of a huge church like the one in Bangalore, sometimes you've got a busy schedule. And so, what are some of the things that you would put in place to ensure, those things are upheld? More purity. Obviously, you get a number of responsibilities that maybe you may not have enough time to interact at a personal level with these people. And so, what are some of the things that you would put in place to ensure, that is upheld?
Well, that's where discipleship kicks in, because as a pastor, I cannot do everything. I just have limited hands, and that's what Jesus, he had limitation as flesh on earth. That's why he chose disciples. And discipleship is delegation. That means you delegate, things to your disciples, teach them, and help them to understand, and that's how you can touch a lot of people. I can touch a lot of people. So I have right now, I touch a lot of new people. I give myself to a lot of older people. But then, as the congregation gets a little older, then the mix in the church begins to change. You have new people getting saved.
Yes.
Then you have people who are already older saints. But then you have others like returning pastors and things like that, people who have had a failure or they come back for redirection. So there's a different mix. And as a lead pastor, senior pastor, sometimes I can't touch everybody. That's where delegation and discipleship comes in, that everybody's got their place, what they're doing, and I can just oversee and see where the need is and touch as and when the need approaches. So
Great. And just skipping back to your calling, I think I've heard Pastor Joe Campbell
Yeah.
and Pastor Greg, I believe, and other pastors in our fellowship mention how that you once had an opportunity
yeah.
to study in the US, and you had pushed that aside to pursue ministry. Would you just briefly
Yeah,
tell us?
so when I got saved and then I started working, I got a job in GE, which is General Electric in the US. And it was for work reasons and not for study reasons. It was for work reasons. And as I started to, move forward in discipleship, and that's when this job opportunity came across. And they said, you know what, you're doing so well, you're good with English, and then, your communication, your work. We would like to send you to the US, so that, you can be there minimum of 3 years to start off with, and then we'll see how things go. This was a dream for every Indian, to go there, all paid for and things. But that was the exact time I had committed to my pastor, and I told him, Pastor, would you disciple me? And it's no coincidence that when I made that decision, this opportunity came as a distraction. And I had to see that, and I told myself, no, I'm not going to do that. It was a very costly decision for me per se, because my boss told me you could never get an opportunity like this again. But I didn't care, because I was sold out for God. I was all in for discipleship. So I said no to that. And you know what? I said yes to discipleship. And people said, that's foolish. But then the Bible says that we have to offer our lives as a living sacrifice, which is a reasonable service. So sometimes people make it sensational. Pastor Raj, you left a job in the US, and they want to sensationalize it. But I always tell them, I don't think it's such a big thing. Because in God's eyes, it is the reasonable thing that you can do serving me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way it is.
I hope I'm wrong, but it seems, people making such decisions nowadays, it's like it's almost natural for them to inclinate towards getting an opportunity like that one. And so, what are some of the things that you would recommend, or what encouragement would you give to disciples who would find themselves in a similar situation as yours?
Well, I would always challenge them. The safest place, like my pastor, Pastor Campbell, will say, the safest place is to be in the will of God. And once you know what your calling is, you got to pursue your calling, because there will always be the pull of career.
Yeah.
You got to choose calling over career, because you know what? Whatever you lose for my sake, God says you will gain it. So, you know what? The things that I maybe have lost an opportunity to go to the US, I may have lost the opportunity to make money, but then God has blessed me in different other ways. So I would challenge young disciples, if you're struggling in those areas, you follow your calling, give yourself, go all in. Don't have plan B. I had no plan B. If this doesn't work, then I'm going to go back to that. No plan B. I'm going all in. God has called me to preach. I'm going to preach the gospel. So work around. Find a job that will facilitate your calling. If they're taking you out of church, that's not the job for you. Or if they may offer big money, but still, you say, you know what? I will not take a career that will take me away from my calling. So first, find out what your calling is, and pursue your calling by making those decisions in your career.
Yeah. And just one last one, Pastor Raj, is people who know they're called to preach, sometimes when they receive the opportunity to step out into the will of God, is some respond differently, others postpone it,
Yeah.
Others assess to see if it fits in their plans.
Yeah.
And so, would you say that there's a time when sacrifice is not present in responding to the will of God?
Yeah, so I think every door that God opens for you, you have to step into. There's no reason why you need to contemplate. Should I do this or not do that? So I would encourage people, doors of opportunities do not open often. And when they do, our response to that is very critical. Jesus said to his disciples, follow me. They had to make a decision whether I'm going to contemplate this, go talk to my Father or whatever. But the Bible says they dropped their nets and immediately followed Jesus. That was an open door. So I believe the quickness of how you respond to the calling doors that God opens to you is also very critical, because those doors may not open again. So you have to always be sensitive, and God opens a door, an opportunity, you got to step in. And along the way, God opens other doors and he helps you. And how do you do that? Simple, you got to trust God. When you trust God, it becomes easy for you to step into those doors.
So can we safely say that sacrifice is inevitable when it comes to responding to the will of God?
Absolutely. Sacrifice is there and things like that. It's part of it. And it's always going to be that way. Christianity has always been, where God expects us to, have sacrifices in life. But the Bible does tell us that God is attracted to people who are willing to lay their lives down as a sacrifice. So sometimes if you're not careful, we can look at it as a big sacrifice. But again, I would reiterate, nothing is too big in the eyes of God that what we can do. It's the simple and the least thing that we can do compared to what he did for us on the cross for us.
Sure. Pastor Raj, thank you so much for your insights. We really appreciate you giving us this opportunity.
No problem, man.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys.